Hey everybody, this is Cameron from Obnoxious and Anonymous, and welcome to another Twin Peaks Thought of the Day. My guest today is somebody who I honestly never expected to ever come on this show, but I'm so happy he did because this is going to be a fascinating discussion, and that is John Thorne himself, the author of Ominous Whoosh, A Wandering Mind Returns to Twin Peaks. It's kind of a long title there. And obviously we know him from Wrapped in Plastic and the Blue Rose magazine and so many other things. So one, I want to thank you for coming on. And two, I have to ask you, have you been kind of teasing this book for a while? Are you behind those ominous whoosh posts on Twitter that I see all the time?
No, actually, that is not me. And
Okay.
so I don't know who that is. And I realized when I titled the book that it coincided with that
Yeah, because
Twitter
I thought,
account, but the title was good for me. So I
no,
figured,
totally. I
yeah.
was thinking maybe you were teasing your book for a year. So,
Yeah, yeah. I hope the Twitter account doesn't mind that I took the title, but I was, that title of that book was something else for many years. Well, I shouldn't say for many, I guess a couple of years.
can you reveal what
Sure.
that original?
I was going to call the book Drinkful and Descend.
Okay.
And just, like Wrapped in Plastic back in the day, I wanted something that Twin Peaks fans would recognize, and that it would connect to the work, and it wouldn't say Twin Peaks, in the
Right.
main title. And so that I was going to call it that, but that was kind of a long title, and it just didn't work. And then for some reason, it was just like Ominous Whoosh, just not only because I liked it was a little shorter, but also because it fit in with a couple of themes I sort of glance at in the book. And the first line, or one of the first lines of the Return, Twin Peaks: The Return, is "Listen to the sounds."
Right.
So I thought that was the right title, and that's why I used it.
No, it's totally awesome.
Yeah.
And I have to say, it is incredible to see the reviews coming out for this book, from obviously professional reviewers and also just regular casual people. So I read this book, knowing that you were going to come on. I did 100 pages a day, and it was
Wow.
very. I mean, it was very easy to get through. I mean, it's, obviously, because it's one, I'm interested in the subject, but two, you're writing. Obviously, have a lot of practice for the last 30 years or so. It's just so digestible, and because you're talking about big ideas and big themes that you carry all the way through the book, and we're going to touch on those. But I just want to say congratulations on your book. I think it's fantastic, and I think that it's one of those books, as other people have said, it's one of those books that every Twin Peaks fan should have in their library. Like, there's a few we have because we're like, we may know the person, or we may, or we want to, celebrate everything Twin Peaks. This is like one of those, dare I say, Bibles that people are going to have. So keep this one in print for as long as possible, please.
Well, thank you very much for those kind words. I mean, I really appreciate that sentiment. I worked hard on the book for quite a while, and the reviews have been pretty good, with the occasional negative review here and there, which I expected. And because some of the stuff I talk about is controversial,
you can't please every Twin Peaks
no,
fan.
of course not. And actually, part of the book is about that. And so, but I when you're writing something and you're by yourself and you're writing it, and you're just living with the text, it's just you really do not know how it's going to, how people are going to respond to it. And so I didn't know. And I kept saying to myself, I'm just going to write it anyway. I'm just going to write it anyway. And it is really pleasing and gratifying to have positive response to it. It really makes me happy. It makes me feel like, well, okay, all that time and effort was, it reached some people and it was worth it.
Well, I'll say this. As somebody who's been a long time Twin Peaks fan myself, since the first airing of season 1 back in the day, there are some things you bring up in the book that I may not see eye to eye with you on, but the thing is, though, is that your case is so compelling that I understand where you're coming from. It's not one of those where you're like, well, I don't even understand where this person is even like getting this information. Right. You're backing things up in ways where I go, okay, I may not see it that way, but I understand exactly where you're coming from, which is honestly like the greatest compliment I could give you. Cause like I can, you know, because there wasn't anything I was like the things that I thought that maybe I would not see eye to eye with you on, we completely do. Like the whole concept of Sarah and the experiment and all that stuff. I've been saying that for years. So when I read that, I was like, oh, thank God John thinks the same way. So anyway, let's get into just an introductory thing about you, because some people may not know who you are. So before Twin Peaks even aired season 1, were you a Lynch fan before that?
No, actually. Okay. I mean, I was very aware of David Lynch, and I had seen the only exposure I had to David Lynch before Twin Peaks was the movie Dune, which is probably true of many people. And in fact, a great many people probably know Lynch from Dune more than anything else. So obviously Twin Peaks made a big splash, but and I was a huge fan, and still am a huge fan of that book. I've probably read Dune more times than I've read any other book. And I was very disappointed in the film at the time when it came out in 1984. I think it's a great film now. I think it's just an amazing work. Well,
especially if you get that Arrow 4K. I mean, like just visually, you're like, this looks astounding.
Right. And so I was disappointed in Dune, and of course, not to get too far off on a tangent, but it wasn't Lynch's fault so much as it was the producers on part of the reason why that film failed. And there's a lot I don't want to get into Dune, but and so Blue Velvet came out, and I avoided it. I was like, I'm not going to go see Blue Velvet.
You're so angry about Dune.
Well, it wasn't anger. It was just like, I don't really like it. I don't really, and Blue Velvet was controversial at the time. I don't know if anybody out there can remember. I was fairly young, but old enough to go see Blue Velvet, and the word was that this was a controversial film, and people might be uncomfortable in it. And I was like, I'm not interested. And then Twin Peaks came on, and I just did a 180. I subsequently saw everything that Lynch had done, and I went to see Blue Velvet at the theater. There was a special showing at a festival. Dennis Hopper was in attendance, and I actually saw Blue Velvet 2 days after episode 2 of Twin Peaks, the rock throwing episode, had aired. And so everyone in the theater was just resonating with Twin Peaks. And so was Dennis Hopper. And so it was almost like a Twin Peaks meeting. It was a great experience. But anyway, long answer. Twin Peaks turned me around to David Lynch. And obviously I'm a huge fan of Lynch. I've seen everything he's done.
I remember when the second season premiere was about to start, and Time Magazine did their big story on it, and they said up until this point Lynch has only directed 8 hours of cinema. And I remember thinking, that's all? Like, now you look back at his body of work, obviously it's a lot more, but at the time he had only done like 4 features and then the pilot of Twin Peaks, discounting the short films and stuff like that,
Sure.
And so it's unbelievable to think that he had that much of an influence on cinema with 4 films at that time.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, Eraserhead put him on the map. There were a lot of filmmakers who paid attention to that film and knew that he was an artist. And then Elephant Man. I mean, Elephant Man got all the Academy Award nominations. That established Lynch. I think he thought Dune would really propel him into that sort of Spielbergian. Well, I don't know if he thought that, but I think maybe at the time, this is the next step, and it didn't happen, and I've argued this before in other places. It's probably good that Dune didn't quite do that, because he went on to make Blue Velvet, and then Blue Velvet, was the film that I think shifted his trajectory, and everyone knew that this was a unique filmmaker who was going to make films unlike anyone else. I
didn't even think he was an American filmmaker, to be honest. When I saw the trailers for Blue Velvet, I remember thinking, with Isabella Rossellini, the way she was dressed and her hair and the lighting, I thought this was like some sort of like Romanian film or something,
or a French film or something.
Yeah. Because up until Twin Peaks, I had seen, I think, the opening 5 minutes of The Elephant Man. They used to play that on HBO and Showtime a lot back in the day when when HBO first came out. And that opening 5 minutes scared me as a little kid, right? So that's all I saw. Dune, I was very little, but still, it just, as you can imagine, it was very convoluted for me as a
Oh,
little kid.
sure. Oh,
I was thinking I was getting Star Wars, right?
right,
And I was like, I don't even understand what's going on. And I
right,
think I checked out in 15 minutes. Didn't see
right.
Blue Velvet because, again, it was like you had to go to the theater or rent it at that time.
Hmm.
So, but around when I was like 14, somebody recommended Blue Velvet, and I watched it. Got
Hmm.
one of those, where you pay what was it, like $10 over that, and they send you like 5 VHSs. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
So yeah,
Right, right.
those
Uh,
mail-in things. And so I
right.
got Blue Velvet because it was so recommended to me, and I remember watching it, and the first like 10 minutes or so, going, "This is really interesting." But by the end of the film, you're so won over by it, right? I mean, you're just like, "Wow, this is such an incredible film." So many so many reasons why. One of the things that I feel like Blue Velvet, Twin Peaks, Wild at Heart, I think are so effective, especially for the people who saw them at that time, is because mysteries, yes, soap opera stuff, yes, but I think it's the coming of age aspects of those films, that especially when you're young, that resonates with you. So like Jeffrey, Sandy,
Hmm.
you're seeing this world through their eyes. So it's really, and of course, Twin Peaks has adult characters, but has a lot of young people too. And so, and then Wild at Heart, obviously, say Lula. I think that David Lynch at that time had really kind of hit on something in the coming of age stories, which he would move away from. But that's why I think that period, 86 and 92, is like its own sort of pocket of Lynch stories.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think Lynch obviously has evolved as a filmmaker, and
Right.
he had certain phases he's gone through. I suppose that's true because certainly, let's see, after Wild at Heart, well, then Firewalk with Me came after
Right.
Wild at Heart, and then there was that 5 year gap.
We,
That
are we counting Hotel Room and On the Air?
No, not really, no, because they were shorter works, and he probably made them faster than he would a
Right.
film. And I mean, I don't discount them at all. Obviously, they were part of his evolution. And
It doesn't.
it's Hotel Room that led to Lost Highway because he was working with Barry Gifford. But you could sort of sense there's 5 years. There's five
Right.
years between Fire Walk with Me and Lost Highway, and you can
Now,
sort of sense a shift.
correct me if I'm wrong. I remember at the time, because I was down in Los Angeles at that time, or let's say 94 and 96. I kept hearing things that Lynch had. I mean, I know he didn't, but I kept hearing things like, "Oh, Fire Walk with Me had turned him off so much by the reception that he was going to retire for a while." And obviously we know that's not true.
Right.
But I remember just hearing, this is like, pre-internet, but even people just saying like, "Yeah, I think he's just taking a break for a while." And and that gap between 92 and 97, I don't know about you, it felt like an eternity.
It did, and we were doing Wrapped in Plastic at the time. So Wrapped in Plastic came out in October of '92, which is 30 years ago. And I don't know when you're going to air this, but October 14th is the 30th anniversary of the first issue of Wrapped in Plastic. And You Fire Walk with Me had only been out a few months, and we were covering Twin Peaks, and lots of little David Lynch things were happening. There was art shows, and there was Hotel Room, and there was the Log Lady introductions to the Bravo rebroadcasted. There were little things, but no film. And it did seem like a long time. It did seem like a long time.
It's weird because when you look at, it's 4 years between Blue Velvet and Twin Peaks, if we don't count Cowboy and the Frenchman.
Mhm.
And those 4 years feel a lot shorter than the 92 and 97 gap.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, probably because we weren't so in tune with,
Right.
something like Twin Peaks.
Right.
'Cause Twin Peaks was still kind of, at least for us, the fans,
Right.
we were still living that all
Right.
through those years.
Now, it's nice being able to talk to somebody who remembers everything because because after the second season finale of Twin Peaks, I was not aware a movie was being made or going to be made until I think it was the TV guide that August, in which they said, big screen Peaks is going to deliver heaps of shrieks.
Mhm.
And at that time, TV Guide and Film Threat magazine somehow got a hold of the entire script. And
Yeah.
they detailed everything. I mean, when looking back, I can't even believe that they had,
Yeah.
this much of information. And, I mean, obviously you're about to start Wrapped in Plastic. You're a big Twin Peaks fan. When did you hear that Fire Walk with Me was going to be made?
Oh, let's see. Gosh, that was before Wrapped in Plastic. I think we somehow, yeah, back then the news, you're right. The news, there was no internet. So the
Right.
news came through Entertainment Weekly, or it came through TV Guide, or it came through whatever magazine that was covering those kinds of things.
Right.
And so maybe it was TV Guide. I don't remember when, but we knew there was a film coming. And then I guess obviously the production started. So we knew that a film was being made.
Pretty fast.
Yeah, I mean, Lynch was not done with Twin Peaks. He was ready to get back to it. I think he really wanted to, and so yeah, there were rumors floating around. I saw those things in TV Guide that you're talking about too,
Yeah.
and I was a little worried about Firewalk with Me, that it was going to be this. I mean, it is a very dark and hard film, but I don't know why I thought it was going to be. I guess because I'm not a huge Wild at Heart fan, and I thought Wild at Heart was a little too violent for violence sake, and too explicit for explicit sake. And I thought Firewalk with Me was going to be like that. And while there's some elements that are, it is not. It stays with the mythology of Twin Peaks. It explores the character of Laura Palmer, and I mean, I saw it with a group of people in a private screening, which is a story in itself. Fire Walk with Me for the first time, and I loved it the first time. I mean,
Mhm.
I loved it. Craig Miller, who did Rock and Plastic with me, he was unsure. He had to think about it, and there was a mixed reaction in that room. There were
Mhm.
some people who were like, "Hey, that's not Twin Peaks," but I loved it. First showing, loved it.
I know, there's this whole retrospective about, like, obviously the film is celebrated now. It's got a Criterion release, etc. Um, I don't, I really like the film. I was, I guess, like, coming off Wild at Heart, which I personally love, but Fire Walk with Me, I remember thinking, there's like, except for the fireplace, there's like no fire in this movie. You know what I mean? Right? And I guess I thought maybe Lynch used up all his fire stuff in Wild at Heart. I remember just like I really liked it, but like there, and again, I'm talking about myself at the time when James makes that phone call to Laura in the bed. I remember
Mhm.
thinking, that's just BS, right? It's supposed to be Leland from Ben Horn's office.
Oh, yeah,
Right, right. I mean,
yeah,
that's
right.
and that's when I realized, like, oh my goodness, like I'm like a continuity person. So when you wrote in your book, um, especially when it came to season 3, and you're talking about how Mark Frost made the comment that, this is our continuity, our mythology. If we want to play around with it, we will. It kind of reminded me of that initial feeling I had when I watched Fire Walk with Me. It was like, it's like, well, wait a minute, there's where's Laura tutoring Josie? Where's her, you know what I mean? There, that kind of
Sure.
stuff. And I remember being a little thrown. It was like thinking, like, it was just the harsh stuff about Laura Palmer, and not
Mm,
the good side that we are talked about in season 1 a lot. And I equate that more to a theatrical runtime problem
right.
than um so anyway, but I mean, obviously I love the film now. I think having the missing pieces, especially like since we'd been hearing about them since the late 90s. Remember when that initial snapper case DVD was about, and they kept saying they're coming,
Yeah.
and then it came out, and there was a I hate to call it a documentary, but it's that thing that Josh Eisenstadt and I talk about a lot, where it's like it's so randomly edited I can't even understand the
Oh, the documentary that was on the
the
season
snapper.
1.
No,
No.
the season, the Firewalk with Me, New Line, Snapper case. The
Okay.
um,
Yeah, yeah. Okay, I
it, wa-
remember that too.
it,
Yeah,
it was
yeah,
so
yeah.
haphazard. Like,
Right,
you'd have Kyle or
right,
Peggy talking about something, and
right.
within like 2 words they'd cut away, and I
Yeah,
was
no, I
just
know. I there were a couple of things like that that were made back then that I don't know if the filmmakers felt like they were trying to channel some sort of Lynchian approach, weird for
right,
weird. And I think a lot of filmmakers make that mistake, that they think that what their impressions are, what they see on the screen, is
right,
just that. It's just, and they're just seeing the surface instead of the deeper intent behind Lynch's
right,
work. But anyway, all that aside, when you talk about continuity, Twin Peaks has always had a continuity problem. I mean, it
right,
may not
right,
seem like it, but it has. I mean, in the
right.
second season premiere, they immediately established the blood type is doesn't belong to any of the three suspects,
Right.
and it contradicts something that they had established earlier in season one. I can't remember the details now. I used to know it, I used
Right.
to know
Well,
explicitly, but
it's sort of like Bobby and Mike at football practice in February when
oh,
like
sure.
the original pilot was supposed to be the fall, right? So
Well, yeah, yeah. There's all kinds of things like that, but I mean, even bigger things that. And then Firewalk with Me messed with the continuity too, and Firewalk with Me messed with its own continuity
right,
because when it was scripted, it was the ring was a bad thing, which it technically is, um, but Lynch saw the power of the Alcave ring as being something that Laura could essentially take from her oppressors, and so he
right.
kind of turned it on its head. And I think that never was the original intent that came through in later editing and approaches to the film as he was preparing it. But yeah, continuity. And then if you go outside of the main um, film story, which is really the canonical work, is what you see on screen. But if you go to the Secret Diary,
Right.
Laura Palmer, and you certainly go to the autobiography of Dale Cooper, I mean, the continuity is gone.
Right.
When
Oh yeah.
and then Firewalk with Me, the continuity. Well, I mean, I've written about how I try to reestablish continuity, but certainly the implication from the series is that Cooper and Sam Stanley investigate the Teresa Banks murder, which is how it was scripted. And then
And in the Scott Frost book too.
yes, and then when McLaughlin pulled out, they had to put Chet Desmond in there. I have written about that
Right.
and have had some, reaction to writing how I do believe that it is still Cooper investigating the Teresa Banks uh, murder, but that's neither here nor there. But the
Well,
continuity has never really fit beautifully together, and I think that's one thing that some fans of Twin Peaks are, they work too hard to try to fit it all together,
mhm.
and I think that's a losing game. I don't think
Oh
you
yeah.
can make it
You're
all fit
never
together,
you're
but
never
it
gonna do it.
fits together on a more intuitive level, which is
Sure.
really what Twin Peaks is about.
Well, so much of Fire Walk with Me is the sort of everything is backwards, right? I mean, obviously it was scripted to be Cooper, but when it became Chet Desmond, I mean, they picked the name Chet Desmond, CD, and then Dale
Right,
Cooper's DC, and then
right.
the picture of Laura, the homecoming picture, is flipped from the house to the school, and like so many things are like
Right.
flipped in Fire Walk with Me. It's almost like an inverse
Sure, and the
thing of it.
town of Deer Meadow is supposed to be like the anti-Twin Peaks. The
Right.
coffee's bad, the diner's not a
Exactly.
nice place, all
All
that.
right. So one thing I have to ask you is that
Sure.
obviously we know that Lynch had the 2 hour 15 minute contractual runtime. If he had had a 2 hour, let's say 30 minute contractual runtime, do you have an inkling as to which of the missing pieces he would have left in?
Wow. Let's see. He probably would. I don't know. No, I don't know, and I don't think
Obviously
anyone knows.
just take your best
Yeah,
guess.
I mean, my guess would be he would have expanded more of the Red Room,
You think
or
that whole
I should say the convenience store scene with the little man was a little longer.
right?
Had one of my favorite lines in it when Bob says, "I have the fury of my own momentum." He took that out. He took out a little bit. Bob talking to Laura in the stairwell. I think some of that might have found its way back in. I think because he was still would have still wanted to stick with that Laura Black Lodge
Right.
dynamic, or Laura's good and bad side dynamic. I still think if he had to cut it down, he would have taken out the extraneous scenes. Pete Martell talking about 2x4s,
Right. Right.
all of that would have gone. But anything that still had to do with Laura, maybe Laura going to the Hayward household and having that conversation with, and Doc Hayward coming in and doing
If
the
they
magic trick. I think that would have stayed in.
if that had been in the film, then they would have had to have, when James peels away, continued that shot pan down to the rose, because you have to have that tail end of Doc Hayward's red rose on the ground to
Yeah,
connect the Hayward scene,
right.
which to this day has still never been seen, that full shot of it, because you can see when James peels away, the camera
Mm,
is starting to pan down
yeah,
when it abruptly cuts, and
yeah, yeah. Yeah, there's probably more of Fire Walk with Me that was shot that didn't end up in the missing pieces.
sure.
But it's probably pretty minor stuff.
Right. Okay, so let's get to season 3, and let me throw out this idea to you and see what you think. In retrospect, when I look at season 3, this is before I read your book. Okay, one of the things that I always, and I really like season 3. Like everybody, I have little quips here and there, but or quibbles here and there. But for the most part, I really do like it. Is it the season 3 I thought we were gonna get? No, but as I've said to Sabrina, like I would say 90% of what I wanted to get out of Twin Peaks, I got out of it. I just didn't get it the way I expected to get it. But
Sure.
right. But I do think in retrospect that season 3, in many ways, is sort of Lynch and Frost recontextualizing Fire Walk with Me because it was so misunderstood and Frost wasn't a part of it, right?
Hmm.
So I feel like Lynch uses season 3 to expand upon ideas and themes in Fire Walk with Me that it couldn't because it was a 2-hour film. Frost is like figuring out how to weave it into the mythology when he wasn't involved with that film. And so you kind of see two men trying to, I wouldn't say redeem the film because the film obviously doesn't need redemption because it's got a Criterion release. Everybody loves it now, but it's, I always say if you want to judge something, make something else. And season 3 now makes, when Fire Walk with Me to some people felt like the little stepchild of the Twin Peaks
Hmm.
world. Season 3 now makes Fire Walk with Me the necessary bridge you have to cross in order to get to it. And I think a lot of the missing pieces, I think obviously they wanted to release those for years, but I think they needed to come out prior to season 3 because so much of season 3 is based upon those missing pieces.
Yeah, I think I would say this. I mean, I think that obviously, as far as Frost was concerned, he had to integrate Fire Walk with Me, and there was new story material that had to be, certainly the Philip Jeffries element, the Owl Cave Ring, all of that had to be explained. I think though that for Lynch, and he sort of says this in his book Room to Dream, I think that some of those maybe those original concepts he was going to explore in maybe later films in the early 90s, he was no longer as interested in those ideas, and that he may have seen some pieces in Fire Walk with Me that gave him new ideas.
Mhm.
And certainly when it comes to Laura Palmer, I think he didn't think of Laura Palmer in the same way in 1992 as he did in 2015. I think he was, and he sort of more than implies it in Room to Dream, where he kind of like, I got something new out of the last scene of Fire Walk with Me. And then obviously we see in The Return
Right.
a whole, sort of a whole new definition of what Laura Palmer might be. So, I mean, without going too far into that yet,
Well, let me pause you real quick.
yeah.
So when the log lady in the new Bravo, I say new, but
Hmm.
I still think of
Right.
them as new. The new Bravo presentation openings that they did. So when she says Laura is the one
Hmm.
for the pilot episode,
Hmm.
take away from what we now know from The Return or possibly
Hmm.
know from The Return. What do you think he meant then by because she was the starting point of the series, or do you think that
Well,
he was already having these ideas?
so the full quote after that is, Laura is the one that leads to the many. I'm
Right.
pretty sure that's what the log lady says. And so I think what Lynch, and I've written about this or a long time ago in Wrapped in Plastic, is I think Lynch had made Fire Walk with Me. And in Fire Walk with Me, he kind of gave us sort of a new view of Laura. He always returns to the Laura Palmer character, and he kind of wants to explore that character and recontextualize that character. And I think the Log Lady introductions, particularly at that point, the Laura is the one uh, line, was an effort on Lynch's part to have you watch Twin Peaks, the series, again with Fire Walk with Me in mind. So it's complicated because I think he wants you to watch the series,
Right.
then he wants you to watch Fire Walk with Me, and then he wants you to watch the series again.
Right.
But this time you have Log Lady introductions. And so
Right.
that first one basically is saying you kind of have to watch the series again now that you've seen Fire Walk with Me. And when you do, you have to think about it differently than you did before, because Laura is the one, and Laura is sort of the one that haunts the series throughout. Not that that's not there without Fire Walk with Me,
Right.
but I think Lynch is saying, okay, you kind of got to return to the series after Fire Walk with Me. So I
When
think
you heard
that's what the Laura is the one quote meant at the time.
when you heard that Catherine Coulson was going to come back for season 3, and that and then Lynch and her were filming things privately by themselves, I almost got the feeling, because the Log Lady introductions had been remastered in HD for the Blu-ray, I thought maybe they were going to be doing new introductions for season 3.
Yes.
Obviously that's not what happened, but that would have been fascinating
Yeah.
if they had done something like, because I
That
thought, well, yeah.
Yeah, that is exactly what I thought. I really did believe that. And I tried to stay away from any information I could on the filming of season 3. I didn't want to know. And I did not know what many people did. I didn't know about the scream, the Laura scream. And I didn't know about that shot that had made it onto the internet. I was I was naive to all of that, which
It
I'm
was
very
on
happy about.
it was on Twitter. It was
Yeah,
periscoped on Twitter.
I was not on Twitter at the
Good.
time. And so
Good
I
for you.
didn't know. And I had people come very close to telling me, and I had to stop them and say, "Don't tell me anything. I don't want to." I really wanted to go into the return cold. Now, that being said, obviously there was stuff that I knew. I knew they were filming. I knew they were filming in Los Angeles. I knew that much. I knew Cooper was driving around in a Jeep. I'd heard that. I was trying to avoid, but I got these little bits, and I knew that the obviously Catherine Coulson she'd passed away, but she had managed to film her parts, and I knew that the parts were filmed sort of quickly in a very few days, and so I was certain they were new introductions.
Right.
I was certain. What else could it be? And in effect, they are almost. You could have edited them maybe a little differently and made them introductions, but I'm glad that they were integrated into the story, because
Oh yeah.
she's a crucial character, and Lynch managed to maintain that importance of the Log Lady in season 3. So, but yes, with you. I thought it was going to be introductions.
The only thing that I was, because people would ask me, what do you think is going to happen in season 3? And I got to tell you, like, I have never been more tense watching a TV show than after when the part 1. I know you were at the premiere at the theater, but maybe it was like this for you too. When the credits, opening credits stopped, and there's that 2 or 3 seconds of black before it fades into the fireman. I've never been more tense in my life, going, what are we going to see as the first new image of Twin Peaks? And the only thing that I was certain of, and this has nothing to do with like a spoiler someone gave me, I was certain that Laura in some form was going to be alive. And the reason why is because Cheryl Lee did an interview with Arsenio Hall years ago for Fire Walk with Me, and she talked about how David tells her that all he wants to do is kill her off and bring her back, kill her off and bring her back. And I figured, well, she's dead now, he's got to bring her back. So.
Yeah, I felt fairly confident that we were going to see a living Laura Palmer again. But and again, I didn't know what was going to happen, but I did an interview just before part 17 and 18 it came on, and I did not know, but I did say, this was with Entertainment Weekly. I said, I think we're going to see Laura Palmer again.
Mm-hmm.
Probably people heard that and go, of course you think that, the spoiler. But I didn't know that.
No.
But I was prepared for Lynch and Frost, especially after we had read The Secret History of Twin Peaks, which was Mark Frost's book that came out about 8-9 months before this show. I was prepared for anything. I mean, I was prepared for them to start it over again, to start the story like there's a body, or Laura Palmer has just been murdered,
I was expecting a Lewis
Laura
and Clark.
Palmer never was murdered, which arguably may be part of the story.
I was expecting a Lewis and Clark flashback.
I tried to keep my mind as open as possible. I think the only thing I kind of expected was that we would somehow address the fact that Cooper had been stuck in the Red Room, and that would be part of the story in some way. But I really was open. I was really trying to prepare myself for anything.
Right.
Anything. Could be anything. So
and we got anything, let me tell you.
We did.
So let me ask you this. When Lynch came out prior to season 3 and suggested that episodes could be played out of order, I don't really believe that because there is a through line of
Yeah.
story, and I understand scenes can be juxtapositioned here and there as you've detailed in your book. I don't really do you really think you can play the entire series randomly out of order and get something?
No, I don't think so. I think that he was being a little
Yeah.
facetious. I think that, but in editing the 18 hours, they moved scenes around that
Oh
didn't,
yeah.
scenes that were supposed to be for part 3 ended up in part, 9 or
Right.
whatever.
Dougie playing catch and things like
Yeah,
that.
well, Dougie playing catch, but that was contractual. They had to have
Right.
McLaughlin in that episode. So, but there were there's lots. I mean, certainly Bobby saying, we found something that had to do with my father, and it was like
Right.
a week earlier. And he said, we found it today. And so I think, he realized that time wasn't as, um, what's the word I'm looking for? The chronology, the movement of the story, from place to place wasn't quite as critical, even though obviously there is a through line and they're telling a story and there is an arc. So I think it wouldn't work if you watched it out of order. But I mean, you could watch part 8,
Right.
after part,
I, yeah. Sometimes
15 if you wanted to,
sometimes I
so
think about what if they had just begun season 3 with the atom bomb scene.
yeah. Oh, sure. Yeah. Can you imagine? I mean, I e- that would have been that would have been that's a really good. I don't know. They could have done it. Sure. We would have all. It's better that they waited because the surprise when it happened
Right.
was that great, wonderful feeling of we have to recontextualize everything, we have to reevaluate
Right.
everything. It would have happened much earlier, and we would have been talking about all of that rather than the characters
Right.
and yeah. So
I'm just kidding.
no, no, I understand, but
I
you
just
make a
think
good point.
about if it had just opened like, oh, new Twin Peaks, and then we got a
Right. Yeah.
10-minute push in onto the autumn bomb.
Right.
I remember being very excited, of course, by that moment, obviously because it's fantastic, but also because of what Ingalls said about their ideas about Fire Walk with Me, about beginning it with an atom bomb. I was like, oh my god, they're gonna do it. Obviously, we didn't get the Formica table and all that stuff, but the concept, you could see where it had
Yeah.
started as an idea and ballooned.
Right.
So let me ask you this: get taking your ideas about the book, the opening scene between Cooper and the fireman.
Yeah.
Okay, so you seem to hint that, and correct me if I'm wrong, you seem to hint that the start of season 3, or season 25, as I like to refer to it as, is literally the start of the story. Because sometimes I watch that scene and I go, maybe that's the opening of season 4, because he's acknowledging Richard and Linda when he doesn't even know about that till obviously the last episode.
Yeah.
Or
Sure.
is this when Dougie / Cooper's in the coma, and when he gets sent away, is that when he wakes up?
Right.
Right. Where do you, just in your ideas, where do you place that scene?
Well, chronologically, I don't know for sure. I
Right.
mean, because I do believe the scene was added later. We have some evidence that the firemen, if you look at behind the scenes making of documentaries that are on the Blu-ray disc,
Right.
Carl Stryken was supposed to be in the Red Room.
Right.
The fireman was supposed to be in the Red Room, and I think that may be where some of this stuff was going to happen. And then I think, and I don't know for sure, but if you try to put some of the dots together, you can make some fairly reliable theories. I think that that Lynch added that scene later,
Okay.
the fireman and Cooper. I don't know for sure, but if you go back and you look, this is what I did in the book. I talk about this in the book. If you go back and you look at almost any Lynch film, the opening scene is always kind of crucial. It kind of sets the stage. A perfect opening scene is the man in the planet in Eraserhead, and the man in the planet is pulling levers and sort of setting in motion whatever the story is going to be. You get a little bit of that in Elephant Man, and anyway, you could go and you can look at other Lynch films, and so. For me, that scene is critical to be at the beginning because I think, well, I feel very strongly that the fireman in that moment is sending Cooper on a mission. He's giving him an assignment. I argue he's actually programming him. That's what the
Mm.
sounds on the phonograph are. But again, I mean, you can read it so many different ways, and I don't at all, proclaim that I figured that out. But in terms of other Lynch films, it made sense that this was the initiating act. This is the act that sends Cooper on his mission. And the fireman has, especially if you look at part 8 and other elements of the fireman's story in
Right.
the return, he has a goal he wants to accomplish. The fireman does, and so Cooper is a tool in toward that goal. And so how does the fireman know about Richard and Linda? I don't know. I mean, he could be that he is existing in all time, so he just knows.
No, I'm talking about because Cooper says, "I understand." So it's like,
well,
so,
but I don't think Cooper does understand.
okay.
And I don't think he does. I think Cooper thinks he thinks he's more than he is.
He can intuitively make his way through that, and which we'll obviously touch base on that as we move through this. Now, one of the things you talk about how Cooper is like a presence throughout the entire series, and even if his consciousness is in the Red Room, he's kind of overseeing everything. I want to get your take on, obviously, the doppelganger has Bob inside of him, and Bob has obviously other souls, including Windom Earle inside of him, because we have the bonsai tree, we have Windom Earle's theme being looped into the sleepwalker music during the diner scene. Mm-hmm. Obviously, Mr. C's carrying around Windom's briefcase in the motel. Do you think Windom Earle is sort of in the air in this? Without, they never mention him, but he seems to be there.
I think everything you said is valid and certainly worth exploring.
But your take,
personally, well, I don't think Lynch was interested in the character. And so I think because
Frost is sticking them in there.
Say again, sorry.
Frost is like kind of sticking little things in there.
And even Frost, I mean, I think Frost saw the Windom Earle character as the Moriarty to Cooper's Sherlock Holmes, and Frost has said, I wish we'd come out of the gate earlier on the Windom Earle story. I think he wanted it to be a little different than what it ended up being in season 2, and Frost was gone for a lot of season 2. And so he may not have been as interested. I don't know that. But I do think if you look at the original script to the final episode, there's a lot more Windom Earle in that story. And then the way Lynch ultimately shoots the final episode of season 2, Windom Earle is reduced and he's dismissed very quickly. And so I don't know if that just was artistic sensibility for Lynch. This is the way it had to go, or whether he was just like, well, I do believe that Lynch is not as interested in an external foe as he is in the internal foe. So a character, the conflict that Lynch is interested in is the conflict within a character, not the conflict outside. And so Windom Earle is that. Windom Earle is the villain. He's the bad guy and that's not something Lynch really.
I'm not saying it's a main focus. It just seems like there are little details in there.
Yeah, and again, you absolutely could be. But I guess my answer, which was very long, is that I don't think Lynch was really thinking about that. I don't think he was.
Well, just when I saw the little bonsai tree in New York, I was like, well,
yeah. I mean, sure. I mean, there were a lot of people working on The Return who had worked on the original series and worked on Fire Walk with Me, set dressers and production people, and I think they remembered a lot of that stuff. And it wouldn't surprise me if Lynch, asked people what, bring with you what you remember as we recreate this world. And so it's possible.
All right. So Bill Hastings' wife, Phyllis, she a Tulpa?
She could be. I mean,
he says because he says you can mimic human nature very well or something like that. And then he shoots her, and there's that flash.
Right, absolutely. There certainly seems like Mr. C has made her a Tulpa, put her in place in order for him to orchestrate this, framing of Bill Hastings so that he's trying to get this information from Bill Hastings. Is she a Tulpa? The only reason why I shied away from saying anything explicitly is because the Tulpas that we see in The Return are explicitly labeled as Tulpa. So Diane is explicitly labeled as Tulpa, and Dougie is a Tulpa, because I think the Philip Gerard says you were manufactured, and so it's possible we just don't see the information. There's not enough to say for sure, and the other thing is, and this again, it's sort of lack of information that you can't prove a negative. Phyllis never shows up in the Red Room, and the Tulpas ultimately end up in the Red Room when they're killed.
I don't think we
So,
cared enough about Phyllis to see her in the red room.
right, and so certainly implication is that she
Right.
is. I didn't feel comfortable saying definitively that she was.
Okay. All right. So I'm gonna throw out again. This is just fascinating to me, just to get your take on it.
Sure.
Okay. Next is when Laura's in the red room in part 2, and she screams and she flies away.
Mhm.
Do you think that's when she goes to Odessa?
I think if that's not where she goes to Odessa, the implication is that she has left the Red Room, or that Laura that we see. It gets very complicated, and
Right.
I struggled with this. That Laura that we see really isn't Laura Palmer. She basically
Right.
says, you know, I
Well,
feel like I know her.
even in the
Right.
making of, they say Carrie Page's next shot.
They do, although take that with a grain of salt, because you only hear it, you don't see anyone say it.
Right.
I mean, if you saw someone standing in that set and said Carrie Page, then you would be able to say, okay, it happened in that moment, but you only
Right.
hear it. So anyway, we're really getting into the weeds here, but
I know.
but so she screams and she goes away. I do believe that that she's gone from the Red Room at that
Right.
point, because then
Right.
that's why Cooper doesn't see her in part 18, not because he changed history, but because Laura left. Um, I it it could be metaphorical to let Cooper know she's no longer a soul to be found in the Red Room, because I do make an argument that it's quite possible that when Laura saw her angel at the end of Fire Walk with Me, it was then that she realized she could go back to the world and live a life different than the one she led before. It gives her some agency in that regard. And again, time is weird in the Red Room. So whether
Right.
it happened then or it happened then or it happened both at the same time, I do believe the implication is that when Laura screams in the Red Room in part 2, she leaves the Red Room. That's
Right.
her choice. Although, again, other people have said she sure doesn't seem comfortable. She sure doesn't seem like she's happy about this happening.
No.
And I would say that she's suffered a lot, and there's a lot of pain, and there's a dark age, and I think
Right.
all of that is implied in that scream.
Well, another thing that I noticed too in rewatches is when the fireman sends the gold ball to Earth in part 8, right? They're so sneaky in the way they edited this thing, because when it hits the United States, right,
Mhm.
and it fades out as the ball is crossing Odessa, Texas. So
Mm.
it's like, okay, was she going to the Northwest, or did they fade it out? Is that when she got sent to Odessa? Like they deliberately cut things in such a way that anyone can just come up with their own interpretations, which is great, you know.
Right, sure. I mean, there is no definitive answer,
No, no.
and while I do try to propose some boundaries around it in the book and try
Right.
to make some sense of it, I acknowledge in the book, and I acknowledge in almost every interview, you could come up with equally valid theories.
Sure.
And I mean, I've heard some theories recently. I was like, well, you could write a whole book
Right.
on on those ideas. So and support them with the
I mean,
text.
let's be honest here. You wrote this amazing book, but this is not the last you've written about Twin Peaks, right? So
Uh,
I
I don't know for sure. I mean, I have some ideas, and I've said in other interviews that I cut some stuff out, some theories. I had a lot about quantum physics in that book,
okay.
which is fascinating stuff, and I cut it out because it got too unwieldy. But I think there's some ideas that could come into play, and theories that could explain some of these things differently than how
Right.
I've explained them in the
Right.
book.
All right. I have to just ask you about this, because in part 2 they're at the Roadhouse, right, when the Chromatics are playing,
Yeah.
and there's a line in there that I don't understand, because they say at the when all the women with Shelley are sitting there, they go, oh, everybody loves Steven. And yet there's no evidence whatsoever in the show that anybody likes Steven.
Right. I don't remember if well, okay. I wrote about that, but I can't remember if it's in the book or not. And I apologize for this, because I had a section, if I'm repeating the book, where I said, everybody loves Steven. What's wrong with these people? Because
Right.
Steven's such a loser. And something's got to be wrong with Shelley's great friend. But it could be that, they just don't, as so many people in Twin Peaks, they're not seeing reality. they see the Steven they want to see.
I know.
But
It's just you would think
yeah,
you would see one positive thing about that character if everybody loves him.
right,
Even
right,
even Mike Nelson tells him off. So,
right. Sure, absolutely. Yeah,
uh,
Steven is a loser.
yeah.
There's
Oh,
no doubt about it.
absolutely. One of the things I loved that you wrote about in your book is when you're talking about Cooper in part 3 dealing with Nido,
Mhm.
and her pulling the lever, which takes the red out of the purple and it becomes blue. I've never noticed that until you brought it up,
Mhm.
and I went back and one of the biggest compliments I can say about anybody's work is you made me go back and rewatch a lot of the parts again.
Great.
Not because I disbelieve what you were writing about, but I wanted to kind of re-experience it with this context, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm watching part 3 and I'm just like, wow, that's so like awesome that you notice that stuff, because that's stuff that like I've seen the show numerous times, never noticed that. So that's fantastic, because I think that that is a wonderful idea as to why Cooper was able to go in through one portal versus another.
Yeah, I mean, I studied it would take me a month to 6 weeks on each part. I mean, I
Mhm.
was watching it and watching it and rewatching it and watching and going through. And so I was trying to figure out what exactly what exactly was happening there. Why
Right,
is she pulling the lever? And then yeah, it seemed, there's sort of this purple color there,
right,
and she pulls the lever and then it's blue,
right,
and or at least it's clearer. And then it's immediately Major Briggs says blue rose, and then the
right,
next thing you know is there's a blue rose in the room when Cooper comes down, and all that
right,
staticky stuff is gone.
right.
And so it's just I wrote that he was bringing red room contamination with him, and she degaused him essentially by
Yeah,
pulling that lever
it's
and
great.
made everything it stabilized everything. And on a most generic level, that is what happens. Whether you want to argue with red and blue and red room and all that, but she stabilizes things
I
for him.
remember when
So
part 3 aired, I did a show that night talking about like, what we experienced. We're trying to figure it all out. And my co-host said that obviously this wasn't true, but at the time he thought maybe Nido was the magician that longs to see, right? Because of the eyes. And
excellent. Yeah,
I thought that's a kind of a cool concept.
that's great.
Obviously, we
Yeah.
know. Do you think? I mean, obviously, I know Nido, oh Diane, all that, but
Uh,
do you? Obviously, I mean, according to your book, you made this part easier to take. But like I was always struggling, like, did they always plan for her to be Diane? Because like this is the second time in the Twin Peaks where an Asian person becomes
mm.
a white person with Catherine, and
Oh
then
yeah,
she
yeah,
becomes
sure,
Diane.
sure.
And
Yeah.
I kept thinking, did they just like run out of time? And Lynch was trying to like put things together. But your concept of the idea that like she may look like Diane, but Cooper can't see that at that particular time. I thought that was
I
a great idea.
Yes, and I think, and then there's a little bit of support from that from Frost's book, where Tammy Preston says Diane was in the jail cell, and of
Right,
course we all know it was NATO. Well, we all know it was NATO, but I mean,
right,
we see NATO, and I say
right,
we're seeing it because that's what Cooper is seeing. But
right.
um, uh, I think Lynch added the NATO element to the story after the main scripting was done with Frost. So I do think it was added later, but I don't think it was added in any kind of rush. I think there was intent there that Lynch had an idea what NATO would be, and he has some familiarity with that actor.
Right,
I think Nay Yuko. I'm sorry if I
right.
forget her name, but she was in Inland Empire, and he wanted to use her again. So yeah, I think that when Lynch introduced her in part 3, he knew that she would ultimately be Diane.
Okay. Um, I love the fact that she kind of barks like the parents and the grandmother.
Yeah. Oh, sure. Well,
And
that's communication. I mean, that I talk about that in some parts of the book. I had more, and I would explore this in further writing, is Lynch's fascination the with communication and the inability to communicate, and how
right.
words are really not sufficient. That the best kind of communication really would be mind to mind, which effectively may be happening as we are seeing the
Well,
story through Cooper's mind.
there's so
So
much communication ideas. I mean,
sure,
Firewalk. I mean, Gordon can't. You can't hear very well.
right,
There's all this stuff where they have to turn down the antenna. That kind
right,
of thing. It's all
exactly, yes.
and since
Eh,
electricity is a part of it.
Lynch has been fascinated with the ideas of communication. I do talk about this in the book. You go all the way back. Certainly, the grandmother is a great example. I mean, the parents bark. There's a difficulty in communicating, and I think the grandmother and the grandson communicate mentally like the fireman and Senorita Dito would
Right.
do. And so and Cole seems to be able to do that. He seems to be able to kind of tap into Albert and read his mind and get a better sense of what truth might be there
Right.
because words aren't sufficient. But Lynch has explored that. Blue Velvet with the father who's had the heart attack. You
Right.
know, you can go on and on and on.
Right.
Um, on the Air is a great example.
Oh
You know,
yeah.
you have On the Air, you have these characters who can't quite seem, they have thick accents, they can't quite seem to get their points across. And that is something that's fascinated Lynch throughout.
Yeah. Tracy Walter can't even see correctly in that show.
Sure, absolutely.
um, now, correct me if I'm wrong, but Robert Forster, was he originally going to play Truman in the pilot, and then
Yes.
things didn't work out? So
Yep.
when you heard he was coming back, obviously they went with the brother angle, which is, I think, great. But did you think, okay, we're just going to go back to the original casting of Truman?
No, I didn't really. And again, I was staying away from a lot of information. So I knew I think we didn't know. I forget when I found out that Forster was playing Frank Truman. It came very late, was
Okay.
just as the show was about to come on. It was before it had premiered.
Okay.
And I think that all gave us hope that I think again, I'm sorry, I'm trying to remember it.
That's okay.
I think for a while we thought he was recast. He was going to play Harry Truman because I think we saw him as Sheriff Truman. And then I remember hearing he was going to play Frank Truman. And I had hope that we would still see Harry Truman, that Michael
Right.
Onkeen would return to the story
Right.
in some small appearance, which unfortunately did not happen. So,
Well, I kept thinking they were going to be able to sneak in a David Bowie appearance. But, I thought maybe they were going to get a couple of shots before, because he was doing music videos right before his death. I thought,
yeah.
may-
Yeah, there was a lot of stuff like that. I honestly, truly believe we were going to see Annie Blackburn again. I really thought that was going to be like a surprise.
Right.
They just didn't announce the casting of Heather Graham, and they were going to show
But,
it. But yep,
yeah, well, that's okay. They didn't, and I was able to make my film. So there it is. All right, so Bobby coming in, seeing Laura Palmer, crying, saying brings back some memories. I don't know about you, but I thought, because of they were dealing with Chad and other elements of the police force that were kind of unsavory and dealing
Mhm.
with like Richard and all that stuff. I thought maybe they were going to bring up the murder in Fire Walk with Me, that he shot the.
Right.
I thought that was going to come back.
Yeah. I
And
did too. I think it was there. I think Frost and maybe more Lynch, but I think they were aware that that was an element of Bobby's past and that he was still carrying that with him.
right.
And so I thought maybe the more explicit reference to it, but uh, there's a lot of history. There's many years have passed, and I think
Right.
Bobby is still kind of struggling with. And I talk about that certainly when the gunshots come through the Double R Diner.
Oh, absolutely.
So,
I thought
yeah.
that was a great idea that you explored, the idea that it's just, I mean, it is a chaotic scene in general, but it is sort of like, it's a chaotic scene that obviously is kind of visually portraying Bobby's state of mind. And
Exactly.
I thought it was fantastic, especially with like the dad and the son both wearing the same thing.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah. I mean, like, you get that I think inherently in the scene emotionally, but you were able to put it down in words where I was like, yeah, that makes complete sense.
Yeah, and of course, that scene. We're talking about the scene with the driver outside the diner. There's been gunshots. Bobby's out there. It's all very chaotic and confusing. It's never referenced again. And so
No.
that really is sort of that's the thing. It's like, why is it never referenced again? I mean, I know Lynch isn't necessarily concerned about having to follow every story to its a conclusion, but so much time is spent there on that scene,
Right.
and it is a really important scene. But so why is it there? And that, my interpretation of that is that it's really Bobby's fears manifesting. So we're seeing what Bobby's fears.
And because Deputy Jesse was there, when he comes into the room later in the episode, I think, where he says, I want to show you my car.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but I always got the vibe like he was trying to get them out of the room to like tell them something. Like he was using that as an excuse to like come out here. I gotta tell you about this thing I just saw in the car. You know,
Yeah, I think when I first saw it, Deputy Jesse appears very soon after we just saw him at the intersection, and I thought
right,
it was going to connect, and then
right,
it doesn't.
right.
And that's the last time we see Jesse. It's the
Yeah,
last appearance he has. And I really started thinking about that character. I thought a lot about Deputy Jesse, who only appears 4 times in the story. He's one of those characters who's sort of those marginal characters. It's more to him, perhaps,
right.
than might really be there. That he's in tune with larger forces. I say he's a young version of Carl Rod. You know, that he is someone who has experienced something, and he knows a little more than it seems on the surface.
You would think that your application to work at the sheriff's office would be like, "Do you know about the Black Lodge?"
Right, right,
Okay, so you mentioned Annie, so I wanted to get into this a little bit. The when Hawk is talking with Frank Truman about the diary pages, and of course you expertly make the footnote, which is like, according to the Fire Walk with Me logic, she gave Harold Smith the diary
right,
prior to the Annie dream.
right.
Um, but see, I think they nailed it because the diary entries they're looking at is on like yellow paper, which is not at all like Laura's
Mm,
diary. So it's almost like she
right,
just grabbed whatever paper she had.
right.
Um, Hawk seems to be a little off on his page counts of like how many pages he's found over the, if you go by the
Right.
original series. Um, and here's my theory. I think that Major Briggs put them there in the bathroom because he's moving all around
Sure,
everywhere.
Major Briggs is doing stuff. There's no doubt that he's sort of a background player
I
who's
just can't see
yeah,
Leland putting them in the stall. I thought maybe Mike because he was in there doing the
yeah,
haloperidol, but I
right,
thought I
right.
thought Briggs would put something there for them to find.
Yeah, sure. I mean, yeah, I mean, I think as far as Frost was concerned in scripting that, he figured out that as the answer. But you're right. I mean, that whole scene, as fascinating as it is, the way it connects back to all the plot and mechanics of the original series, it introduces continuity errors. And
Right.
so one
But
of
I
them
think
is, you said, the diary pages.
Yeah, I think Hawk's
So,
bringing all that up. I think he's unsure himself. I mean, he doesn't know for a fact. He's
right.
just kind of theorizing
Sure.
himself
Absolutely.
about stuff. One thing that you didn't mention in the book, I'm sure you probably did and cut it out, but I want to just bring it up to you. The
Sure.
fact that Sonny Jim's first line to Dougie is "I need to brush my teeth,"
Yep.
which is like from the missing pieces, and
Right.
I thought, well, that's clever.
Yeah, I had that. I may have had that in a footnote. I took it out.
Yeah,
And there are reasons why I took some of this stuff out, because sometimes it was like a big speed bump in this in
right.
getting through, and so I didn't want to have to spend too much time
I
on it.
understand,
But anyway, yeah, I definitely thought of that, and I
but I
did
wanted
write
to bring
about
it
it.
up to you. So
Yeah, 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 because it does. And yeah, and then you have Cooper shortly after that looking at himself in the mirror, just like essentially he did in the last episode. You know, in the bathroom. He's in a bathroom and he looks at himself in the
right.
mirror and he's almost touching his face as if he's remembering what had happened at the end of season 2.
Absolutely. One of the things you also talk about in the book is the thing that a lot of people have been speculating about in terms of like, in terms of like, let's say the diner patrons switching
Hmm.
during, right. Or, you talk about like kind of the happy accidents, right?
Hmm. Yep.
Obviously Ed's reflection.
Right.
Even when Dougie's car explodes and it cuts back, it's a different car that's on
Right. Uh-huh.
fire, right? And I understand they may be happy accidents, but I think that they had enough room to play that much like the Fire Walk with Me being the opposite of Twin Peaks, I think that they sort of leaned into that a little bit, and may not be like what they originally intended, but I think they kind of were like, well, here's a little pepper this, a little pepper this in, throughout. And it seemed like because those Patreons moving around, the fact that Shelley turns around and does a room scan and goes, okay,
Yeah.
that to me like felt like that one
Yes.
was done on purpose.
Yeah, I think, well, I don't think it was done on purpose. I mean, I don't think it was done on purpose. I think that because I mean, is it Dwayne Dunham was the
Right,
editor?
right,
Yeah,
right.
has said explicitly, no, it wasn't done on purpose. I do think though that there may be. I agree with you, because I think Lynch may have looked at it, and Dunham may have said, this doesn't work. It's not matching, but we're stuck. And Lynch is like, go with it because it still does work.
Mhm.
So it's sort of what you're saying is that it does, it does imply some other something going on, and
Well, yeah.
Lynch was fine with that.
Well, and even if you want to just say complete happy accidents, okay, there's two Coopers in the world, and the world's in disarray. I mean, it complements it.
It
It's
does, absolutely.
you know,
Yes, I agree,
it's not
absolutely.
one of those
Yeah,
continuity errors where you're like, well, that just messed the whole thing up. It's
right,
like,
right.
right,
Right. It wasn't a striking continuity error like, if Cooper got into the car wearing one set of clothes and he got out wearing another,
right,
that would have been a mistake. It wouldn't we'd be
right,
it would be a mistake for us to try to find meaning in it. And I
right.
think they avoided things like that
I
happening.
also think that if you can casually throw out a line like, "Is it future? Is it past?" You can get away with anything.
Sure.
So,
Oh yeah, I think there was a lot of that allows Lynch to have a little more room to dream, room to
right, right,
play in that story as long as it doesn't go too far. As long as it isn't
right,
too strikingly contradictory.
right.
Absolutely.
Um, I'm a firm believer. I don't think you are, but I do like to think of Red as the grandson of the
Mhm.
treatment,
Sure.
and
Yep.
how I connect that is because the grandson and Mrs. Treeman were at the diner in Firewalk with me when Shelley's helping Laura take out the Meals on Wheels. So I thought there would be a connection there where Pierre would
Mhm.
see her. Um, I really appreciated you wrestling with the character of Red in the book, because you say a lot of things that I don't see spoken about, which is like, I don't know what to make of this character. He shows up, he's important, then he's gone. I don't know. I don't
Right.
know. And I love the fact that you aren't just kind of like, well, I don't know. You just seem like it's okay to be unsure of things, you know?
Well, yeah, and I think, and I don't know this for sure, but I think maybe in the early scripting of the return,
Right.
they had envisioned Leo coming into the story. That Leo would have survived, whatever happened to him at the end of season 2.
Oh, wow.
He's still alive, and that he would have been back with Shelley, and it would have totally shocked and dismayed
That would have blown my mind.
Bobby how this could be, and it would make some sense in terms of
Right.
what was happening with Becky, and but I don't think they could get Eric DeRay to. And again, I have no evidence of this, and no one's ever told me, and I've never,
Right.
I haven't read anything, but it, it seems like it fits a pattern. Like, well, they couldn't get Eric DeRay, so we'll have someone else play a Leo-like character, and we'll
Mhm.
call him Red. And that kind of connects to Leo because he had the red Corvette. I mean, you
Right.
start to see these connections or
I
parallels between Red and Leo. It could just be, of course, Shelley's attracted to a guy just like Leo.
right.
Um, and that may be all there is to it. Or maybe they had thought, oh, we'll have Leo come back. I
Either
don't know.
way, it works. It works for me both ways. You know what I
Sure, yeah. I
mean?
mean, Red is
But
dealing drugs like Leo was. He meets with Richard just like
he
like
does the
Leo met.
magic tricks too, like the grandson did. You know what I mean? So it's
Oh,
like,
sure. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
to me, I feel like whichever way you want to look at it, it thematically works for for what
Yeah.
they needed to work.
You're right. Absolutely.
But if it had been Leo, oh my god, I would have that would have been insane if she was
Yeah.
back with Leo and Bobby was like,
Yeah.
and oh my goodness.
Yeah. And who knows? They may have intended that. I mean, they obviously they had hoped Michael J. Anderson would come back, and that didn't happen. They'd hoped David Bowie would come back. Obviously, that was totally out of their control. They'd hoped Michael Onkeen would come back, and that
they
didn't happen. And so
and they
there were actors that they had hoped would come back, and I don't know, but given all that, it's possible they hoped Eric DeRay would come back.
Chris Isaac did tell me they contacted him.
Okay.
However, he said that he was very ill at the time in bed for a long time and could not. He did not know how big of a part, how small of a
Mhm.
part, or whatever. But he said that he did get word that they had reached out and he couldn't commit to anything because he was sick for many months. That would have been interesting to just know what it would have been. I'm going to assume it was probably just like a one or two lines in the red room or something, if that. But
Hard to say. I mean, I as I was writing the book and I knew I had to deal with the Chet Desmond issue because I have a
Right.
theory about Chet Desmond. And in that time, while I was writing the book, the David Bushman book, Conversations with Mark Frost, came out. And Frost is pretty explicit. He says in those interviews that he pursued the Chet Desmond character being in the story, that he pursued it with Lynch, and Lynch didn't want to do it. That's what Frost says. And it could be that for other reasons, who knows what the reasons, but he said Lynch wasn't interested. And so they may have contacted Chet Desmond, or I'm sorry, Chris Isaak. But even if they had it, ultimately Lynch may have made the choice. We're not going to do it anyway. Who knows?
I mean, he didn't say explicitly David Lynch contacted me. He just said that the production had reached out. So it could have been anybody.
Yeah.
Have to ask you about your Drink Full and Descend chapter in your book here. What on earth is going on in these couple pages?
Okay. Well, I've been asked this before.
Okay.
What do you, let me ask you this.
Yes.
What was your response when you saw it the first time?
I was thinking that we were somehow like inside the microphone of the radio station.
Okay. But I mean, just in terms of, there's no wrong answers. Just in terms of when you're paging through the book and then you hit that. You're confused, right? Well,
it kind of works for your book midway the way episode 8 works for part 3.
That's why it is placed right before part 8. So for me, and I talked about this, I think, with Joe Bacco, this wasn't, I wasn't really overthinking this, but I had a professor tell me when I was writing my master's thesis about criticism, he said, great criticism attempts to install in the reader the feeling they had when they were watching the original work, or it tries to parallel the original work. I didn't understand what that meant. So how do you do that when you're writing a critical essay about something? But then I thought, well, I wanted something in there. This was sort of the artistry of the book. The gate, when we all remember watching part 8, and I remember being dumbfounded and somewhat thrown off. And I wanted to sort of try to create that feeling in the reader to just hit those pages and go, what? And if you look closely, there are some interesting things embedded in that text.
Sure.
But all of that text is sound effects. It's sound effects, or almost all of it. Some of it is numbers like license plates or addresses. So it's sort of just noise, quote unquote noise, literal noise and visual noise that appears in the story. And I put it all together. And that works on another level. I don't want to get too explicit about what I was trying to do here, but listen to the sounds. Ominous Whoosh is the name of the book. The idea that sounds are important. So I put that in there, and we talked about communication earlier, so I won't go into any more detail.
Yeah, no, I just say it definitely worked and startled me as to like what was happening in the book.
It's only 3 pages,
right?
So I figured I could get away with it, and not too many people would be necessarily upset. But there was intent there on my part, and I don't know if, again, it's dismissible. You can just flip right past it, but I did put a few little Easter eggs in that text. So I don't know if you saw them or not, but you don't have to go look at it. But
on the top of my head, I'll have to go back and reread it.
Nothing in there, nothing that I created. It's everything in there comes from the return.
Right. Obviously we know, the Ed and Norma scene is fantastic. You talk about it, you write about it. And, David Lynch has commented after Peggy's passing about them being together, and it's part of Frost's final dossier and all that. However, I had to say, when I watched season 3 for the first time, because Ed takes that momentary pause with his eyes closed, and then Norma comes up behind him, I remember thinking, oh my goodness, is he basically, doing what, is said earlier in the series about, the dreamer, lives inside the dream. I thought, oh my goodness, did he get turned down by Norma after all these years? And now he's just living in his mind, is what he wants to have happened. I don't believe that to happen.
Right.
I'm just saying that interpretation again, like so much in season 3,
Sure.
could be there if you wanted to just think that it didn't work out or something.
Certainly, you could absolutely. I hadn't thought of that, and you're absolutely right. But given how low he is at that point,
Right.
for it to turn so quickly, and then of course Shelley acknowledges it. That doesn't mean anything. It could still be Ed's imagination. But I think there is a joy there. There is a
Oh,
joy of
absolutely.
reunion there, and I think it's legitimate. And Lynch celebrates it by cutting away to the clouds and the
Right.
music. And so, and I think in that moment when Ed sits, I think he gives his faith over to the universe. I write
Right.
that he gives his faith over to Norma,
Right.
and it's him letting go. It's him letting go of all of that stress and saying, if I just let go and have faith, the right thing will happen, and it does.
Oh,
So
I'm
yeah,
100% with you.
sure.
I was thinking, there's so much about, we live inside a dream. I was like going, oh no, please don't give me
Right.
a sad ending like that. Okay. How do you, one of the things that you talk about in terms of like, this is, Cooper's consciousness and seeing over,
Mhm.
while he's in the Red Room, he's overseeing the events of season 3. Is that how you justify the sheriff's office growing to the size of the Double R Diner for that final sequence?
Oh, what, Frank Truman's office being so big?
Huge. I mean, it's like there's enough for the doors to open and like
Right.
15 people in the door.
Right, right. Yeah, sure. Okay. Yeah. I will say yes. I never thought about it. Obviously, it is a massive set, and they built that set in LA.
Obviously, that's
Um,
not part of the. I know it's not part of
right,
the real
right,
location.
right, right. Um, it's interesting though. Did they shoot the Lucy in the receptionist area inside the
Yes.
actual?
Yes.
Okay, so because Cooper comes running in and down the hall, but um, maybe I didn't think about I didn't think about that. I obviously there's some exaggeration there in terms of, and Lynch just needed the room for all
Oh,
he
I
does.
know.
I mean, you know what, you make a good point, because with my argument about Cooper is Cooper needs an audience. Cooper wants the adulation and the attention of people, and in that scene he gets it. He stands in front of a large group of people. And
Oh,
so I could easily make an argument, and if I were to add a footnote, I would say, I would even say, and his stage grows to the size of his need. So yeah, that's a
well, that's
nice
what I thought
observation.
of when I read your theory on it. I was like, well, that would make sense why they went with that huge oversized set. You know
I
what I mean?
do say, that some of the little background things that don't make a lot of sense can be made sense of if we are seeing it through Cooper's embellishing mind. That
Right.
Cooper adds elements to what we see, so that what looks like nonsense is really a reflection of his inner self. I
Right.
make that, like I make a point about the weird box and cylinder that's behind um, oh, I'm losing. Tammy Bird is the actor's name, but I can't remember
Lorraine.
Lorraine in just before Ike the Spike kills her.
Right.
Uh, there's this bizarre thing on the wall. I mean, it's just, what is that? I mean, I make the argument that Cooper is equating the bloody death of Lorraine with the bloody death of Sam and Tracy, and they are in this room full of boxes and camera lenses. So
That's
so
that's as good as any. Because I always thought to myself, why is Lorraine's death like the most violent death in the history of Twin Peaks when she's a small character?
right. So that death parallels what happens to Sam and Tracy. The
Right.
blood on the wall, the cutting, and then there's something on the wall that looks like it comes straight out of that glass
Right.
box room.
Okay. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we're about to deep dive into some pretty nerdy territory here, so just hang on. Okay. One of the things you talk about a lot, which is the superimposed face of Cooper, right? That and during that whole sequence, and you talk a lot about that in Take the Rings video, which you've not seen. Check out Take the Rings video. I've watched it like 10 times. I love that video. The way he edited it with the music, I was just blown
He
away.
did a great job. I was very pleased. Yeah.
One thing I noticed in rewatching that scene after reading your book is that Cooper's superimposed face goes away only for the Diane reveal, then comes back. Like, so it's not over the entire, it goes away, Diane's revealed, and then it comes back with the clock.
Yes, I know. Yes, I
Oh,
know.
I know you know
Yeah.
that. I'm
No,
just,
no, I know.
I'm just saying this
I'm
for
not trying
people
to
watching.
correct you or anything. I just,
No,
yeah, I'm,
but it's
yeah.
like, for the viewers out there who don't watch this stuff like we do, what why do you think Lynch took it away for that moment to just bring it back instead of just having it through the whole thing?
Well, I guess Diane is. I also believe Diane is an observing presence. That Diane is similar to Cooper in that she has been fractured, and she has been put in her own red room. That she is attempting to rehabilitate herself in some way to reunite with Cooper. And so this isn't really truly Diane, though, that appears there. It's a amplified Diane. It's an idealized Diane. It's the Diane Cooper wants. Is the Diane that shows up in the sheriff's station. That is not truly Diane.
Well, let's just say for namesake, it's a version of Diane.
Yeah, it's an element of Diane, and I think Diane is there as a presence, but I don't think the Diane we physically see in the room is Diane. I think it's Cooper's wishful Diane, because she says, I mean, she gives him this incredible kiss, and then she just sort of worships him. Cooper, the one and only. I mean, this is what he wants to hear. This is what Cooper wants from Diane. And so I think she's there watching it too, in a way. We just don't see her face. And that may explain the fade away at that moment.
All right. So when Cooper is, hang on a second. One of the pleasures of having kids is they come storming into the room. Okay. So when Cooper is watching James and Laura's conversation, right?
Yeah.
Why do you think Lynch pretty much plays out their entire conversation, even to the point where Laura talks about even Donna doesn't know me and all that? I mean, he has that out where he could like cut to Cooper watching and then, maybe tighten up that conversation, but he allows almost that entire conversation to play out. I don't think he did it just for, fanning out the runtime. So do you think there is some sort of feeling you get from re-experiencing that entire scene again?
Yeah, I think it's important. That's an important part of Laura's story from Fire Walk with Me. These are the moments that Laura is really, really falling apart. She is believing that she has no worth, and she will not understand that she does have worth and that she is something valuable until she sees the angel in the train car. And I think Lynch is reminding us of the despair that Laura is going through at that moment. And I think probably as far as Cooper is concerned, Cooper believes he can save her from that despair and doesn't really realize that she needs to save herself.
Right.
So I think that may be why we see all that.
I thought it was interesting because she mentions Donna, and then right after that, Sarah / Judy or whatever comes in and knocks over the pictures and stabbing the picture. But the only picture she doesn't knock off is Laura Donna's picture.
Right.
And so I thought, okay, this is a back-to-back Donna reference here. And I kept thinking like wow, they're it's kind of saying to me like I don't know, it's that Donna is playing some sort of, even just the idea of Donna is playing some sort of role here too.
Yeah, and that picture of Donna, can we tell for sure that it is Lara Flynn Boyle as Donna?
I believe it is.
So in Fire Walk with Me, it was
Maura Kelly.
Maura Kelly. So, I've often wondered if I truly believe, this is getting off your topic a little bit, but I truly, really, and I wanted them to do this when they were preparing to make the show and they were casting. I wanted a third actress to play Donna. I thought, oh, how perfect. We have the Donna of the series, we have the Donna of the film, and we have the Donna of the return. It just would have been
I almost think that Donna was supposed to be what Gersten ended up being, and they just switched out Donna for Gersten.
I think maybe when it comes to Lynch, though, Lynch is going to go to actors that he likes. He wants to find room for certain actors. I'm sure, he was like, oh, I'm going to find room, in here for Gersten.
Who only shows up one time in season 2, right? At the premiere.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. But she,
no, I think there's another moment where she shows up. But
she might be playing the piano. Oh no, wait. I'm sorry. Yeah, Gersten.
Yeah.
Not Harriet. We never see Harriet. We see Harriet in that one scene, but yeah. But yeah, Lynch had worked with this actor. Why am I forgetting her name? Who played Gersten.
Oh my goodness.
And,
yeah, she's in everything from Dune to Hotel Room to
right. I apologize. Been working with Twin Peaks for so many years, and I'm looking for I'll find it.
Alicia Witt.
There's been times where I can't remember. It's amazing I can keep all these names, the actors and the characters, and there's like 200 characters.
And there's how many Mike and Bobbies?
Right? And so, I'm making an excuse, but sometimes the names slip away. Sometimes they just slip away from me. Even the character names will slip away.
Well, when we talk about other stuff, you're thinking this, and then you're not expecting to pull out the name.
But anyway, yeah, obviously Alicia Witt was in Dune, and Lynch has an affinity for her, so and she was in Hotel Room, so he's going to find something for her. He wants to work with her again, and you see that in The Return. He's reaching back to actors he's worked with, Naomi Watts, he's worked with, and others. He wants to pull them in and have fun with them again.
Oh, I'm not disagreeing with you on that at all. I just wonder if it was originally thought of to be Donna, and then they switched it and got Alicia.
No, that's the thing is, I think they were. I'm not even sure Frost was involved with the Gersten part of it, but I mean, who knows? But I don't think. I think they deliberately just left Donna out. It just wasn't really going to. They could have.
But then they mention her twice in part 17.
Yeah, right.
Sure. That's just kind of interesting. Okay, so then when Laurie's body disappears, it then cuts to the opening of the pilot, and we see Josie in the mirror, right?
Mm-hmm.
I understand, obviously, showing Pete fishing. That's essential. But Josie in the mirror and then cutting to her turning away, is that just to remind us of, okay, there's always sinister things happening in Twin Peaks? Or because I really did think that noise that Ben and Ashley Judd's character was going to end up being Josie.
Yes. Right. Oh, sure. I mean, it's hard not to think that it's Josie.
Only because of that moment you talk about in your book, which is in the second season when Ben quickly turns his head around to that noise.
Absolutely. In his office. Ben hears a noise in his office just after he does, Pete says, "Josie, I see your face." I think that's what he says. He's looking at a painting.
Right.
They cut to another scene where Pete Martell says that.
Right.
And so the implication is that, and Josie, we know Josie died in the Great Northern. We know that her ghost seems to inhabit the wood of the Great Northern. So it may, obviously it's Josie. And so, yeah, I believed, it would be great if it were Josie. I think they wanted to remind us of the opening of the pilot, and they probably wanted to give Joan Chen a credit. And that is a wonderful shot of Joan.
Oh, it is. It is.
So
it's fantastic.
Again.
I just think it's strange that they show Pete, they show Josie, but no Catherine.
Yeah.
And because I remember when
they do. Don't they show Pete give Catherine a kiss and say "gone fishing"?
Oh, do they? I can't.
I thought
maybe they do. If they do, fantastic. So. Okay, so now I have to ask.
Oh, I've lost your video. You froze on me.
I think okay. I'm back. Are you back?
I can hear you, but you're back.
Okay, good. Fantastic. We had some internet outages earlier.
Yeah.
So, okay, if this is going to be one continuous story of season 3, or as Lynch calls it, one giant movie, in part 18, they re-show Cooper leading Laura through the woods as we see at the end of 17. Right now, if this is one continuous movie. One, why re-show it? 2, why is the footage different? And 3, does that imply that Cooper has tried to do this numerous times?
Well, I think it was just, I mean, my answers are sometimes kind of mundane because I think it was just an editing choice that it fit for.
But do you think
reminding us? But yeah, if it was one I mean, do I think it's happened over and over again? I think it's quite possible. There's a cyclical nature to Twin Peaks, and time and time again, there's this. I mean, the whole premise of the the 4 ages repeating themselves on a much, much grander scale. Twin Peaks has always been about possible cycles. So
Right.
it could be that
Like
it's
when he
another.
says to Laura, we're going home. I remember thinking, okay, a lot of help that would do because Leland's still possessed. Okay. So, but then they do that shot of like, kind of like going towards the fireman's place. And I thought, is he taking her to the fireman's castle?
Well, so I thought a lot about that, and my conclusion is maybe not satisfactory, but I think, Cooper has been programmed by the fireman to bring Laura home, and he doesn't understand it. He doesn't
Yeah.
understand why. And so that's not the right time for him to be taking her to that place. But he doesn't understand it. He just thinks, I got to bring you home. And yet he's leading her, it seems, deeper into the woods.
Right.
And so
A couple times.
I think that Cooper in these moments is both following programming that he can't quite understand, and also thinking that he is the one who will be her rescuer, her knight in shining armor, that he will
Right.
save her. And so he just is really not in control of himself. And so I think that's a lot of what's going on in there, because she screams, she disappears, he turns around, he's confused. That's the story, is that Cooper just can't quite figure out
Mm-hmm.
this larger story that's going on. And I think he wants to believe he's much more important than he is. So,
Okay. So that's going to get into our next topic here, which is, okay. Now, you mentioned your book. Frost has mentioned it too, as about Cooper's hubris, right?
mhm.
That the idea that he could even go back in time and rescue her. I've said before that a lot of people in law enforcement have expressed in the past like oh I wish I could have stopped that tragedy from happening. So I
Right.
get that
Sure.
idea. Now it may be hubris to do that, but in a way I feel like I'm going by your theory now,
Mhm.
which I love.
Mm.
I think if it is hubris on his part, he doesn't quite realize though that he's just being used for the fireman to take Laura to where it's almost like she's dead. She had to be alive in some way for him to take her to the Palmer
Mhm.
house so she can
Mhm.
stop the dark age
Mhm.
by your theory. So yes, it is hubris, I guess, but at the same time, like he had to do that because he was the only one that could bring her there.
Well, okay. Cooper is a noble character still. Cooper is a good character. There's no
Right.
doubt that Cooper wants to do the right thing. I mean, I
Right.
don't doubt. I'm not trying, to paint a picture of Cooper as sort of nefarious, or at least,
No.
I guess I'm trying to find the right
Look at
words. But I think Cooper, though, his flaw is um not that he is trying to do good. I think his flaw is that he thinks he's either the only one, or that he is more. He's a superhero. I think he thinks of himself in a way. He hasn't truly come to grips with who he is, that he is just a human being. And I think there's some commentary going on here about the Cooper we see in the original series, Twin Peaks, who is somewhat larger than life, a character who really wouldn't exist in the real world. And he has these qualities that make him, sort of, he's an exaggerated character. And
Caroline humbles that
which is
character.
why he's an endearing character. But I think Cooper's mistake is that he figures he can just do it all on his own. He doesn't even really need Diane, and he's going to do it, and he's going to save Laura. And he's sort of working at odds with what he just needs to do versus what he wants to do.
But wouldn't you say though that her screaming at the end by your theory, and her closing the dark age, that with him realizing what he did like accomplish a
He
mission.
did. He succeeded.
Right.
He succeeded, but he doesn't know. He
No, he
doesn't
doesn't know.
understand. And
Right.
I think that's the unfortunate aspect, is that Cooper is left confused. He's left just sort of perplexed by the whole thing, and it's somewhat tragic, because I don't think I think he could have understood. I think if he got out of his own way, he could have probably made things easier for himself,
Sure.
and gotten out earlier and done what he needed to do, and and repaired his relationship with Diane and treated her as an equal, and together they could have delivered Laura, and then and in some, find some transcendence and peace in what he did. But he's lost, and that the true final scene of The Return is Cooper sitting in the red room and Laura whispers in his ear, and he's it's that slow motion scene at the end of part 18. He's still lost. He can't put it together.
I kind of took that closing credits thing as sort of like Lynch just returning us to the central image of Laura whispering to Cooper's ear.
There's a poetry there for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that I know a lot of people thought the ending was like really downbeat and depressing, especially with that music, that dark space low music. But it's like, I kind of thought, well, it kind of is sort of the ending of Fire Walk with Me in terms of like, it's Laura and Cooper together. It's not Laura standing there by herself, in a dark street. It's not Cooper, it just felt like, well, they're together. We're stopping the story here. Cooper's in mid thought when she screams. So he's not even like, it's not like he's sitting on the curb going, I failed, and we've just paused the story at this point. I felt like things are going to ultimately be okay, because obviously the electricity goes out, kind of like saying to me like, well, eventually they're going to succeed, whatever's going on. It's
right.
But when this idea that you have, which you completely back up like 100%. I know you got Hinduism for Dummies, which cracks me up. My wife thought that was hilarious. But like, you completely back it up with the number of 10, the 10th avatar, the number, the white horse, a lot of other factors going in there. That when you talk about this idea that Lynch has stated in interviews about the ages, the dark, the different ages and the dark ages, and that the 10th one will come and put an end to the dark age. I don't see how anybody going by that thesis could see the ending of The Return and think it was a dark ending. In fact, when you look back over Lynch's work, we've touched about, with the exception of his LA films, right? Almost all of his films have a happy ending in some way, or at least a bittersweet ending. And so I feel like The Return, if we're going by the thesis that she's going to stop the dark age and we're going to get to the golden age, it's ultimately a happy ending.
Well, it's an inevitable ending if you go by Hindu beliefs, that ultimately the dark age will end and a golden age will come. What's unfortunate for we who inhabit the dark age is that we will never see the golden age.
Great.
We can't cross into it, which is why Lynch doesn't show it to us. So, and I know I've talked to Joel Bacco about this. He's a little uncomfortable with the idea that it's quote unquote a happy ending. And I think this is also why a lot of people go, well, it's not really the ending. The true ending is still Fire Walk with Me. It's that last scene in Fire Walk with Me. That's the true ending. I believed that for a long time. I don't anymore. I think it's an inevitable ending. I don't know if it is a happy ending. I mean,
well, yes, I say happy in terms of like just
the right thing
in theory.
Right. But what's unhappy about it is that Cooper never comes to understand that. You see, I think that's where there's a tragedy there, is that Cooper could have come to understand, okay, I'm not going to exist after this moment. The dark age will end. But I've come to terms with that and who I am and what I need to do and why this is important, and I accept it. And I don't think he ever quite gets there. I do think there is a happy ending, and it happens earlier in part 18, where a part of Cooper and a part of Diane reunite. That is Janie E. Jones and Cooper Dougie.
I gotta tell you though, I thought when I first saw part 18, I didn't think this while I watched part 18, but in 17 when he says, or no, 16, I think,
I'll be coming back.
Yeah, I'll be coming back. I thought he was going to send his Tulpa on whatever the mission was, and he was going to stay with Janie and Sonny Jim, the real one.
Sure. Yeah. Well,
obviously, that's not what happened.
Right.
I thought that maybe that's what was they were going to pull a trick on us. And
sure. Absolutely.
But yeah, I'm not saying happy ending like, like the ending of Blue Velvet happy ending or Wild at Heart. I'm just saying like, it may not be as negative as people think it is.
Right. I think what is happening is that all these dark forces that have been at play, the Tremons are potentially a dark force, Experiment,
Right.
Bob, they have been eradicated. They are no longer preying upon humanity and feeding off of our pain and sorrow anymore. But then again, I mean, that dark age is over, and a golden age begins. And so, I should say I've got to be careful because I am not an expert on Hindu theology. And I
Oh,
did read that book, Hinduism for Dummies. And I
I
will
know.
say, thank goodness for that book, because I tried to go and read Hindu texts, and I bought the big books, and I bought, the
Right.
intense, you know, um, classic Vedic texts, and spent time with them. But what I needed truly to do was go to a Hindu temple and have someone educate me over years in Hindu theology to truly understand it. And so I write about it as if I know what I'm talking about. And there was that book, Hinduism for Dummies, and it was great because while those are unfortunate titles, it is basically a primer on
Right.
Hinduism, and it's written very well, and it and clearly, and it gives you these basic concepts of Hinduism. And so this was what, before we started recording, I was alluding to this. This is where I first came upon the idea of the 10th avatar, and 10 is the number of completion. It was that book. I was reading it, and it just was sort of like the clouds parted. I
Right.
was like, wow, there's a 10th avatar. 10 is the number of completion. The 10th avatar brings the dark age to completion, and it occurs time and time again. It was as if I found the Rosetta Stone and
I
pieces
can't.
of
I can't even
piece.
imagine you being you in your house or going down the street getting the mail without that skip in your step after you coming across all
Oh,
that
I
stuff.
ran into it was late at night. I ran into the bedroom. My wife was getting ready for bed. I go, look, look what I found. And I went through it with her in the most general sense. I said, I think I've got it. I
Yeah.
think I found something that fits so well with what we're seeing. Plus, it was backed up with Lynch interviews. I had all these Lynch
Yeah.
interviews where
Yeah.
he talks about these things. So, um,
You have everything working out for you in this theory because, like, there's a lot of Twin Peaks theories where I go, "That's a great theory," and but like yours just rings so true in this aspect because it's backed up by the text. It's backed up by Lynch interviews. It's backed up by what we see in the show,
right,
right? You have
yeah,
every aspect. And again, Lynch is never going to say to you, yes, that's it.
right,
But at the same time, though, it's not like a lot of theories you hear and you go, wow, that kind of makes sense.
sure.
But this one hits you in the soul. And if you're someone who is truly a, lover of Twin Peaks in terms of like where you internalize it so much where it's like, I'm one of those people that would go up, to Snoqualmie, North Bend prior to the festival, so I could have that individual experience being in the town, right?
Right.
So it's in a way, without sounding so crazy, the religious aspect of Twin Peaks, it hits you in such a way where I said on Twitter, like it almost brings you to tears when you hear it because
You went out on me again. I apologize for interrupting you, but you're frozen on my screen. We'll see if you come back. I think maybe we disconnected.
okay, hello,
Oh, now you're back. I was
okay,
just
cool,
about to text you.
okay, great.
um,
No, I was just gonna say it when I heard your theory, and saw the video, the Take the Ring put together, it as someone who kind of internalizes Twin Peaks a lot, it hit me on such a spiritual level, that I was so thankful you brought this up and you discovered this because I think while like you said, it's the new recontextualized version of Laura Palmer, right, compared to
right,
the original series.
right.
It does there is a through line though that brings you, dare I say, full circle,
Hmm.
um like the ring itself, and it's I know you didn't make this stuff up, but the fact that you uncovered it, and it's just that alone makes the book worth owning.
Well, I appreciate it. In that essay where I lay out Laura's, function and redefinition is right in the middle, pretty much in the middle of the book, right after part 8,
Right.
because part 8 throws us with all this new information, and then I come back to it again, and obviously in part 18, you have to come back to it again and talk about it. But yeah, it felt right to me. It felt good to me. I felt very confident in it, in that even if it doesn't explain some of the other things, and I think the work is somewhat loose in that you can't put a clean boundary around the whole thing and make every piece of it fit with every other piece.
No, but in terms of part 18 by itself, it completely fits.
Yes, I do feel very confident in this aspect of the story. Is on the most general level, if we're going to reduce the return down, it's Dale Cooper has to go find Laura Palmer and bring her to a certain place and time so that she can fulfill her destiny. That's it. He's being assigned that perhaps by the fireman. All of the other story is fascinating story about the internal workings of Dale Cooper's mind, about the people he's met and lived with in the past, their struggles in this world. Those stories that are being told are very important to this overall general story, because those stories are embodying this dark age. Whether you can find a way to live in peace and happiness in dark times, and it's hard for all of us right now in the world, is a dark time,
Right.
Or do you not? Do you find yourself stuck in the past? Do you find yourself living with nostalgia? Do you find yourself, incapable of getting past your pain and sorrow? And I think Lynch and Frost suggest you can do it. And those are important elements of this overall story, that the larger story of which is Cooper having to get Laura and bring her to the end of time and space.
Because the way I've looked at season 3 is sort of like, well, the doppelganger's out there in the world, so it's kind of like an excuse for why the world is so dark and messed up right now. But if you have the pure heart of somebody like Dougie, you can make your way through this world. You can make everybody's lives better. But the thing that always stopped me in my tracks was, okay, that seems to be where we're going, but then why Lynch would then take a detour in part 18 and kind of take us back to those lost highway routes and just say, no, we're just going to leave you in dark times again, and then off we go, the show's over. But so when your theory came up and then I read your book, it made the part 18 aspect of it that I wasn't comfortable with. The idea of like, okay, your thesis seems to be, or not yours, but like Lynch's thesis seems to be that if you're a good soul, good person, you can make your way through it, only to be left alone on a dark street, right? Going, what year is this?
Right.
Your theory and the way you discuss it, it makes the events of part 18 fit into my idea of what I thought it was to begin with. Like it's not this leaving us in darkness. Actually, it is the just before moment of something new, something better coming.
Yeah. And the interesting thing about part 18 is you can look at parts 1 through 17 as all prologue, and 18 is the true story, or you can look at parts 1 through 17 as the true story and part 18 as the epilogue. It fits in, but it also sort of it's separate. It's sort of floating out there by itself. And so, but it is important to try to integrate it.
Right. So I have a couple more questions. One is, after Fire Walk with Me, and of course Lynch in 2000 saying Twin Peaks is as dead as a doornail, which I agree with you. I thought, okay, yeah, he's done with it, right?
Right, sure.
Even so, that I remember seeing a talk he gave at Berkeley, and somebody, it was like posted on MySpace of all places, and someone got up and said, asked him a question about Dale Cooper, and he didn't even take the question. He just moves on to the other question. So you didn't think season 3 was ever going to happen, and you were surprised that it was announced. if you were a betting person, do you think this is it with the final dossier and the books and stuff like that, or do you think this whole Wisteria unrecorded night thing was going to be another aspect or another? I don't know. Do you think this is the end we've seen of David Lynch and Mark Frost's involvement in Twin Peaks?
Yes.
Okay.
But do I think it's the end of Twin Peaks?
No,
I don't think Lynch and Frost are going to work together. That's why I said that so quickly. I think they've moved on and they're not going to collaborate again.
Okay, I'm just throwing this out though. Do you think Frost has another book he's interested in, or the final dossier is the final dossier?
Yeah. I think Frost is done with Twin Peaks.
Okay.
I think Lynch thinks he's done with Twin Peaks. I think Lynch could wake up tomorrow morning and realize I have this idea that I never thought of before, and it has to do with just Cooper and Diane or something, just those two characters or something, or Cooper and Janie E or something. And I didn't think of it before. Now I want to go do it. I think it's unlikely. I think it's extremely unlikely. I also think that Wisteria Unrecorded Night might have been tangentially connected, but I don't think it was going to be further embellishment of the Twin Peaks universe. I really think it was something else.
Do you think Showtime was under the impression that they were going to do like maybe another season?
They called it a limited event, and so I don't know what the negotiations were, but I think they probably, when they went into Showtime, they probably said, this is going to be a mini series. This is not going to be an ongoing series. This is going to be self-contained. Whether or not they were going to break it up into two seasons, I've often wondered, because the original announcement was 9 episodes. And then we heard there were 18 hours, and I thought, oh, they're going to shoot 2 seasons worth, and we're going to have a cliffhanger in the middle, and it's going to be like the original show. But I think that just,
I like to joke around that they just took their 9 scripts and Lynch stretched them out.
Well, I think that Lynch did stretch them out. I do think that they had 9, and I've thought about that. If we'd seen the original 9 scripted hours, I think it would have moved very fast. And I think we might have thought it moved. Well, I like the pace of it. I mean, there are a lot of people who don't. I like that it slows down and it takes its time, and we kind of can just.
Well, I love the way you break it up too, in terms of like the 8 and the other 9, I think, and then the last 3.
Last 3. Yeah, there's a 3-act structure there.
I love the idea, because you actually nailed something I've always thought of as like, the show has such a pace, and then it and you use this word, it plateaus. It completely plateaus.
Yes.
That's a fascinating concept, because I would almost argue that those middle episodes between Laura's murder being solved and Windom Earle coming in, it plateaus there too.
Yeah.
For a little bit of time.
Yeah. Unintentionally. That wasn't what they. Yeah, right.
Obviously, I'm just saying there is sort of a parallel kind of thing about
there
it.
is. There really is parallels between the return and some of them I think were intentional, some of them were unintentional. But yeah, what I call Act 2, parts 9 through 15.
Right.
Is there's
but the way you brought stuff up, it's so fast. I didn't even notice that that's the only time in the series where we see the Roadhouse booth.
Yeah, they're only between 9 and 15.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Again, like I just didn't even think about it, right? And the idea that at the end of 15, pretty much everybody except Audrey and the main characters have been wrapped up by 15, because Audrey comes in 16.
Right, yeah. And Audrey's kind of a separate, that is a separate story in many respects. But and also in Act 2, part 9 through 16, I think that's when the FBI task force arrives in Buckhorn,
and they
go back to Buckhorn,
and they stay in that hotel room.
They stay there. And
right.
All just
I always thought they just ran out of money because of the atom bomb sequence.
They there until, well, I mean, they're there until technically part 17. They're still there, but I mean, it's not exact, like everything's changes in part 16, but nevertheless, it's see the pattern.
It completely works. Right. And it's, sometimes, you hear somebody say something and you go, oh yeah, no, that's true. That's true. And I think that while it may not have been intentional, in terms of their structure, it did work in terms of the way they edited it.
Yeah. Yeah, I do believe that Frost, when he was approaching the first original condensed story, because he's such a great writer and knows how to tell a story so well, that he
Right.
is just, his natural inclination is to see how it's going to break up into acts, how it's going to, we're going to set all these things in motion in the first part. We're going to have to deal with it in the middle, and then we're going to have big, conclusion. Typically, an act three is shorter than the previous acts because it's all the culmination. So I think he probably, in a very general sense, saw it that way, and that just sort of naturally found its way through all the expansion that Lynch added and the editing and all of that. It fell into place that way.
All right. One of the questions that I have to ask you is because you mention it a lot, and you say, there's a lot of things in season 3 that is frustrating for people and frustrating for yourself, but you never get into it. So I just want to ask you, what are the aspects of season 3 that you yourself or find frustrating, or maybe particularly don't care for? Because I mean, every Twin Peaks fan is going to have a few things.
Oh, that's a good question. What do I find frustrating?
And sometimes the things that I don't like about something, 5 years later, I end up loving that. You know what I mean?
Right.
Right.
Sure. I think I do say this in the book. I think there's some backstory that isn't really fleshed out. I mean, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And I wrote through this and realized it didn't make sense when Cole is saying, well, Cooper disappeared. He had this plan. We're going to kill two birds with one stone. We're going to, Ray is really an informant that's been implanted. And that, I think it's the result of Lynch and Frost having different artistic dynamic, and Lynch abandoning some of what Frost had hoped would happen, and Frost kind of, and then Lynch also not only abandoning it but contradicting some of it. So I, I, I guess it's unfortunate that some of that stuff isn't clearer in the backstory, because I don't think Lynch. I think Lynch could have told the same 18 hours with all of its mystery and all of its, value,
Right.
and still have connected the dots a little more in the backstory.
Mm-hmm.
It's a minor thing. I don't.
Like for instance, like one of the things I like to I say this jokingly, but like I when Audrey wakes up, or wherever she is, I like to think of her as like she's in one of those rooms that the Tulpa Diane kind of describes, that after Mr. C did whatever he did with her, that she wakes up and she's like, where the heck am I? I'm in this other place.
Right.
Whatever. But I always joke around with people saying, well, she's actually the, of course, going by Mark Frost's book, The Final Dossier, I said she's got to be the hairdresser of the Black Lodge, because every time Laura shows up, she's got a different haircut.
Right. Oh, yeah, right. So it's Audrey's fault. Right. Audrey's
with the curls at the end of Fire Walk with
Me.
Me.
Yes.
And
Sure.
And the short hair. I'm like, where is
Yeah.
Laura Palmer getting her hair done in the Black Lodge?
I guess
I'm joking.
Well, just one other thing. I mean, obviously, we all feel this way. There are things I wish we could have seen that we're not going to see now. I mean, it would have been nice to see Michael Onkeen. I'm not one of those people who says the show fails because they used Frank Truman instead of Harry Truman. I don't believe that. I think Frank Truman's a great character. I would have liked to have seen Sheriff Harry Truman again. It's elements like that probably will never have an opportunity to. You will probably never get a chance to see Harry Truman again, and we almost had a chance, and it didn't happen. And that was nobody's fault. I mean, there was no. Right. I think it was just circumstances. So yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I was just thankful that season 3 kind of put the Alcave ring into like context for me, because I finally understood what it was doing. Because for years of Fire Walk with Me, I was like, don't take the ring, and then she takes the ring. I don't understand this thing. But then after you see season 3, you go back and watch Fire Walk with Me, and you go, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And Frost talks about that, about how he did like that ring aspect about Fire Walk with Me, and he wanted to integrate it into the story more. So I'm sure Lynch was absolutely in tune with that. So yeah.
It's an incredible story. I just season 3 is one of those things where it's like sometimes I remember there, you just throw your arms up and go, I don't know. And then other times, like you find it so, amazing and perplexing, but fascinating. And it's just, I think it caught people by surprise because it is so different from the first two seasons, that I think it threw some people like, wait a minute, this seems more distant than
Yes.
than
Right.
Feels more almost Cronenberg than season 1 Lynch, but that's because he changed as a filmmaker.
Yeah, he changed. Mark Frost changed, and I think that's an implicit theme in that, is that we change. We're different people now. They were different artists, and for some of us, it's interesting because you say you were watching it when it showed in 1990. You watched it at the beginning,
right?
And a lot of fans have come to it more recently than that, and so they have a different relationship with the show, not only in terms of how long it's been in their lives, but also in terms of the way they watched it. Because most people probably in the recent years have watched it very quickly. They watched it one after another. They may have binged it, there was no gap between season 1 and 2. There were no gap between season 2 and Fire Walk with Me. And there was no gap between Fire Walk with Me and Return. We had 25 years is a long time. And I think, for someone who did watch it back in 1990, I grew as a person. I changed as a person, and I'm almost like, and I don't want to overemphasize this, but I was like the ideal audience for The Return. Is that it happened when I was younger. The first series did, and I attempted to come to terms with what that was. I let it go. It was gone. I didn't think it would come back. I changed as a person and how I see the world, I think. And then there was this new Twin Peaks, and I was willing to take it on its terms, as opposed to someone maybe who just watched it over the last few years and doesn't have those years of life experience.
I would argue that people
Anyway.
who watch on Netflix or got the Blu-ray sets and watch again, more power to you. I'm glad Twin Peaks has an audience.
Oh, sure, without a doubt.
Now that being said, I do think that The Return has a built-in thing saying it almost plays better if you had that 25-year gap in between, because
they're addressing it. There's no doubt they're addressing 25 years. They are addressing the idea that, and part of it is, the Cooper and some characters haven't been able to change. They're stuck, and I think there's some audience members who are stuck, and they don't necessarily have to be this audience I'm talking about who just maybe only in the last 10 years experienced Twin Peaks. There are people who watched Twin Peaks in the old days who wanted to feel what they felt when they watched that original show. And the new show is saying, we're not doing that. We're not going to, this is not fan service. We're not going to give you.
And yet they do give us some fan service though.
Yeah, but I mean, it's
on their terms.
It gives you, it doesn't give you, I said this in the book, it doesn't give you what you want necessarily, but it does give you what you need.
So well, and again, that's what I said with Sabrina. It's like, it may not be what I was expecting, but it gave me like 90% of what I wanted.
Yeah. Yeah, sure.
I did not expect it.
I almost used a quote in the beginning of my book, but it was too confusing. David Foster Wallace has a quote where he says, a good book teaches you how to read it. And the reason why I didn't use it is I didn't want anyone to think I was talking about my book, because that quote was that quote is about Twin Peaks: The Return. Twin Peaks is a good piece of art that is teaching us how to watch it. And any great piece of art expects us to contribute to it in some way, to step up and participate with it in some way. And I think that's what The Return is doing. It's asking of us some more than other television would. So,
and of course, the idea of that, movies and TV don't change, we do. So
exactly.
So if you didn't like The Return when it came out, Try it now.
Right.
You may be a different person.
I hope there are people. See, the thing about The Return is it's 18 hours, and it's an awful big ask,
Just
to say,
watch the two
you know,
parts as the movie.
right, right. And I have had only one. I really was hoping, and the book's only been out 2 months now, but less than that. I'm hoping that maybe somebody who wasn't a fan would look at the book and go back and watch The Return again and have a different appreciation of it. I have had one person say, I wasn't a fan of The Return, but I bought your book. That's the closest I've gotten to it. And I responded to that and said, oh, I really hope you watch it again and let me know what you think. They may not like it. And I understand, but it's a big
But
ask for someone to go back to watch 18 hours again and come away
but you're
hoping
not just
maybe.
but you're not some random person putting out a book. I mean, you have a built-in audience for 30 years.
Yeah, but there are a lot of people, and I know them, who have completely what's the word I'm looking for? They've completely divested themselves of Twin Peaks. They've completely, because of The Return, they're no longer fans. They don't want anything to do with Twin Peaks, and
Their loss.
it's driven them away. Well, it is their loss. And what I try to do in the book is carefully say, I understand if you didn't like it. And I'm not expecting, there's art that people love that I don't like. Okay. And that doesn't mean that it's not great art. It just doesn't work for me. And you have to remember that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And there are great movies that I don't care for. And so I understand reasoned criticism of The Return is out there, and you cannot like it and say it doesn't work for me. And they're not wrong. Those people are not wrong. But there are some people who did come with expectations for The Return from the original series, and they were unhappy. And I hope maybe they could come back to it somehow. And
well, I would think that if you are a Twin Peaks fan, and even if you didn't like season 3, you're telling me out of 18 parts, there wasn't something you didn't like in it. I mean, come on, you know what I mean? Like,
well, sure. I think people liked lots of pieces of it, but I think they were hoping for something else. And
well, listen, I think that I think much like Fire Walk with Me, season 3 is only going to improve with time. I think definitely after the pandemic, season 3 already looked better to a lot of people. And I want to just thank you for not only coming on and talking to me about this, but
sure,
your book is incredible.
Oh, thank you.
And I love the story that you told online about how you got this picture.
Mm-hmm.
And
and took that photo myself. That book is a real product of my work, writing, formatting, and photography. So
I'm sure you're taking a much needed break, but what are you entertaining yourself with right now besides doing interviews about your book?
Oh, well, like what am I watching on TV?
Yeah,
or
yeah,
reading?
I'm
watching a lot of stuff on TV. Well, I'm watching the new Lord of the Rings, which I like quite a bit. The Patient with Steve Carell is a really good show. I watch a lot of television, and so there's a lot of there's been a lot of great television on this year in particular. There's been some fantastic. Reservation Dogs is one of the great shows on just ended on FX Hulu. That's a great show. I am taking a break because I was writing for 3 years. Just about every day I'd sit down and write, and but that was a good thing to have, and I do miss it actually, even though there were times where.
But you were also writing for Blue Rose magazine as well, so.
Yes, some of these pieces in the book ended up in the Blue Rose because I wasn't going to write extra. I was like, okay, I wrote a piece here. Let's use this. I don't want to. But yes, the Blue Rose magazine, and there's a new issue coming out very, very soon. So I wrote a little bit in that. I don't know if this answers your question. I'm always reading and I'm always watching TV. And I've taken a little break from writing, but I think I'll have to write. I'll have to write something. I don't know what yet.
Right.
Something.
Well, yeah, don't stay away because you're multi-talented. But everyone check out this book, Ominous Whoosh, Wandering Minds, Returns to Twin Peaks. Yeah, fantastic book. Thank you, John. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you.
And be sure to follow John at his Twitter here, and he's pretty active. That's great. And as for us, obviously you can follow us on this channel, like and subscribe, and we will see you soon. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. We'll see you soon. Take it easy. Bye-bye.